Thank you for joining us live back in the room and in the web stream link. We want to apologize for the inconvenience of the break of the web stream before the coffee break here in the room. We understand that the people in the web stream didn't have the opportunity to listen to the replies to the questions and answer sessions. And for this reason, we have decided that all questions are going to be replied written after So we have decided that all the questions are going to be answered written and will be provided together with a meeting report so that we ensure that all people in the room and in the web stream have access to the answers of the questions. And we will now proceed with the rest of our program, and we will move forward with our first panel that is going to be virtual. Our first roundtable regarding the European digital twin of the ocean as a game changer, replying on questions for whom, what, and how. The panel is going to be chaired by Peter Heffernan, that is next to me. Peter Heffernan was the chief executive of the Irish Marine Institute, an oceanographer, and a very active member of the Mission Ocean board. Thank you, Peter, for chairing this panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and my greetings to everybody in the room here physically and online. We have a hybrid panel. I have my colleague Caroline Bockel here with us in Brussels, and we have Martin Visbeck, Corinne Locher, and Andrea Tamarelli online who will come in. I think you have their backgrounds, but as I'm going to start with Martin, he is a very well-known personality in the science arena, observations, GeoMar, the modeling that comes with it, very involved at the UN and the UN Decade and in all the work on the digital front there. Martin, can I check our connectivity with you and that you can hear me and we can hear you okay?
Yes, good morning, Peter. Good morning, all. I can hear you very well, and I think my microphone should work as well.
Very good. And I note by your background that it doesn't appear that you're on your yacht, but I'm sure you are.
I wish I was, Peter. Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the first question for you, Martin. And look, we've all seen that the expectations around the development of the digital twin of the ocean are particularly high. And you, as a coordinator of the UN Decade of the Ocean Ditto program, you know this firsthand. But can you give us, in a nutshell, your own views and take on how the development of the digital twin of the oceans will actually change how we use marine knowledge for policy, for decision making, and for the sustainable blue economy? 3 minutes, Martin. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate our European community to really moving this agenda about developing digital twins. I'm using the plural twins of the ocean very well. In my view, digital twins of the ocean will be a game changer. Not that we haven't done anything like that before, but the way we talk about our capabilities of observing the ocean, of using these observations to inform models and to represent our ocean systems in the digital way. Now, what digital twins are, they are virtual replications of the ocean, and the idea of twins come from engineering. It's to optimize outcomes. In engineering, it could be planes, traffic control, hospitals. And the digital twins of the ocean, they will help us to provide decision-making support for human interventions into the ocean space. I mean, I don't have to tell to all of the colleagues here that humans are changing the ocean by polluting it, by climate change, by using and sometimes overusing it. But if you want to, as the mission says, go into a more sustainable green-blue economy, then the question is, how can we optimize our marine spatial planning, our industrial use, our protection of the ocean by taking into account all the stakeholders' requirements And I think digital twins are a wonderful way to take all of that information forward in a digital way and explore future scenarios. And I sometimes say future-proof future scenarios. So what type of blue economy is sustainable? What amount of protection do we need where? How can we imagine future food of the ocean to be delivering? And how will coastlines look like and can be used for various purposes? Digital twins can provide guiding answers to all of those questions. They're not perfect. They will be improved over time, just like engineering tools will be. But they will set more in value our investments in ocean observing. They will use ocean models as we have them and AI capabilities to enhance them. But in particular, our ability to visualize the ocean, regions of the ocean, will be the game changer, Peter, that you've been arguing for, because it will really also allow non-experts to see what our actions and planned protections or planned sustainable use will do to the ocean environment, how it will change, so we can come up with the best compromise from all of these desirables. And I think they will basically inform decision makers, that is marine spatial planners, governments who set regulations, but they also optimize the blue economy, the industrial use, the citizens' use of the ocean. And they will really help us globally to see and understand how the ocean is evolving this time, and in particular, how it might look like in 10 years out, 20 years out, depending on human action.
Thank you, Martin. A beautiful overview. And one thing which really resonates is the sense of something that's fit for purpose. And it has to evolve, but I think an understanding of what that purpose is from a very early stage is critical for what is designed and being designed at this time. And would you like to go a little deeper and maybe give a few specific examples of how you could see it being truly transformative?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. So if you look at as part of the EU mission on the ocean, some of the funded programs that we see in Europe, you see some of countries taking this approach very seriously. For example, one example that comes from the UK, they are thinking about building a digital replica of an area that they're imagining for protection. So if they want to know how to best protect that part of the world, which sensors do they need to use to really give best guidance to that. Another great example is from Norway, where the city council of Tromsø is managing that fjord system, which is under a lot of pressures. There's oil and gas desirables, there's certainly safety and security issues with submarines and military traffic, but there's also fish farming. And what they've done in a transformative way, they have required from the fish farming operators to take measurements in the pens, make that data available to get it online assessment of what the ocean is today, but they're using that data also to inform future uses of the ocean. So very practical applications. And what you will see is that digital twins will be operated and run in large parts by the private sector, and they'll be built out by the academic sectors with EU funding. But you will find a lot of private actors using them. I sometimes, Peter, liken them. We use geographical information systems now for marine spatial planning, and in less than 10 years, we will be using digital twins for that same purpose. So it's the next innovation step, and it will be amazingly transformative of what they can do and how they can really optimize our interactions between humans and the ocean for hopefully a green, blue, sustainable ocean use.
Thank you very much, Martin. And that brings us very well into our next contributor, because you've given examples where marine spatial planning will be a backbone of decision making, but then this digital twin becomes a servant or of service to that decision making. And Corinne Locher from the French National Hydrographic and Oceanographic Service has a wealth of experience in this arena. And I give the floor to you, Corinne. Can we hear and see you, Corinne?
Sorry? Can you hear me?
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning to all, and thank you for your invitation to participate in this panel. I very much appreciate the name Game Changer and the hope it represents. I would like to point out the presence of my colleague, Mrs. Adeline Souf, head of our Maritime Spatial Planning Division, and whom many of you already know. Concerning the interest of the DTO for the MSP, we hope evidently a help for decision makers, as Martin said, for the installation, evaluation, evolution of the coastal and maritime policies, with a direct impact on climate change and adapting to. In the imagination of decision makers, we are going to obtain a sort of simulator capable of providing us with reliable, responsive decision-making assistance, giving us a vision of the evolution of the environment and the impacts of human activities. The SHOM, after more than 10 European projects on the maritime spatial planning, particularly on the aspect of the data necessary for the MSP, notes that climate change is generally not taken into account in the process. This is due to a lack of knowledge of the phenomenon, which the DTO can bring us, a lack of understanding of the changes caused collectively by our various maritime policies, and also by operating habits that have been in place for a very long time. For example, we operate for marine protected areas with definitively installed legislation to protect species which may be one on the move and whose protection should follow adaptation. We need to rethink our management and planning habits with the changes underway and the tools such as the DTO being put in place. The enormous collective progress that we have just experienced with the implementation of the maritime planification in the member states and the current feeding of the plans on EMODNet is one of the parameters that the DTO and the data used to carry out the plans will have to take into account to be in capacity to produce results useful for action. During these European projects, we found that the validity, long-term production, and interoperability of data produced for national needs or European directives often pose problems within and between member states. It seems to us that to fit the DTO, efforts will have to be made on these points. In addition, we are talking about the DTOs here, as Martin said. You have noticed that everywhere in Europe, territorial digital twins are being created. They are DTTs, digital territorial twins. And for example, we have in France, digital twins for an estuary, a river basin, a human activity, a maritime basin in Baltic, for example, or in Adriatic, digital twins for a province, a region, a port. And it seems very important to think to connect these systems to the DTO. It will be really necessary to understand what is happening and assess maritime policies. The number of initiatives is exploding, and as we all know, it is from the start that we can ensure the interoperability of systems and data, and not when they are installed. Also, we allow ourselves a suggestion for the DG Mare. As you did more than 10 years ago with EMODNet, perhaps you would provide a key service by setting up a European Forum for Digital Territorial Twins in the coastal or land sea interface, a sort of dynamic inventory of initiative, an incentive for the interoperability of systems, and enabling liaison with the DTO. It seems to us that this is the only solution to obtain realistic results in the DTO. It takes many years to set up this consultation, coordination, and we have not 10 years ahead of us, I think. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. You certainly give the impression of one who's going to be very busy in the next while, and very best wishes with all your endeavors. And hopefully, the contributions and the enhanced capacities that will be developed with this twin will make the load a little lighter and make the success a little higher as your endeavours go forward, and the very best of luck with those. I turn now to Caroline Bockel, who is a leader of Ireland's Seafood Development Agency, which brings both a very traditional but also a very forward-looking and innovative agenda to the table. And Caroline, to pose to you the questions of, from your perspective, what would you like to see? How do you see it being a game changer, if you can? And any other views you'd wish to share with us about this digital twin. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. My agency that I work with in Ireland is tasked with the sustainable development of the seafood sector. So we are right at the cutting edge of hopefully what this fabulous tool, when it's developed, will be delivering real results for. And there's 4 main areas where we see it can be tremendously powerful once it is operational. The first one, as Peter referred to, is the more traditional side of the business in fisheries management. If we look at some of the challenges that fisheries have at the moment, we look at species such as cod and mackerel. Their migration patterns have changed. We go out to do scientific surveys. They're not where we expect them to be. And we're using those parameters to really contribute to the likes of ICES, where they then build their scientific advice that we all adhere to. If we could use this model to then add an additional dimension, which is a predictive capacity to complement that scientific advice and that survey data, that would then give us a much more ecosystem approach to fisheries management. It would be of enormous benefit for all elements of sustainability, not just environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability. The second area, which is more the new emerging side of seafood development, is in the aquatech sector. Aquaculture is of critical importance globally at the moment. We know that globally, the per capita consumption of seafood has doubled in the last 50 years, and the global demand, the entire global demand for protein, is going to double again in the next 25 years. We absolutely need to rely on seafood to meet this enormous global demand, and the aquatech sector is going to be the means to enable that. That sector is developing artificial intelligence. We heard Francisco talking about that earlier. They're developing artificial intelligence, how to be able to monitor fish, how to be able to genetically screen for fish, to ensure that we can grow this sector sustainably, responsibly, and very productively. But what that sector needs is it needs access to reliable data. It needs access to huge volumes of data that this system DTO can absolutely provide. If we look at the moment at how we're managing aquaculture, we have got fabulous monitoring systems, but they're quite far out at sea. They're not bay specific, they're not region specific. If we can then use some of those modeling capabilities, so we can say to an oyster farmer, this is what's happening in your bay. These are all of the parameters that we can measure in terms of temperature, in terms of Carenia blooms that are coming into the bay, in terms of all of the variables. If we can say to those farmers, this is the challenge that you're going to have coming at you in days' time, then we can help them to manage that. The third area is in storm predictions. We have launched a climate change report in Ireland, which talks about the need for new tools for climate forcing technology. This would be hugely beneficial, not just on a societal level, but also to the fishing community. And finally, one of the most pressing issues at the moment, certainly in Ireland, is the area of marine protected areas and offshore renewable energy. The tools that we are using to determine what is the optimal configuration of offshore renewable energy arrays and also where to put marine protected areas are very crude. They are quite basic. We are using very sort of sparse biological data. There's tremendous gaps in it. Again, if we can use this DTO model to fill in some of those gaps and to be able to create better models with better outcomes where we can actually look and see what would happen if we model it this way or this way. It builds trust with our stakeholders and everybody can get the best outcome. So very quickly, in a nutshell, they are the initial benefits that we would see to the seafood community.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And many practical challenges, which are also opportunities for the applicability and the services to society. And the one thing I'll share with you, after 27 years experience of convincing those who represent democracy, politicians, to keep investing and investing more in ocean science and observation, is results, is a sense of tangibility. Again, I can see enormous potential benefits of the demonstrability of the use of information and knowledge creation through the visualization, through the downscalability of modeling and predictions that I can think would have great confidence building in investment decisions by governments. And I think it's a kind of a two sides of the one coin. We'll always need more data, but we have to maximize what we have. Funding for more data can be enhanced and encouraged and facilitated by the demonstrable benefits and the outcomes and the visualizations that this super new tool can provide us, and to address some of those gaps that Caroline has outlined, while also building wisely the necessary marine protected area network that is essential for the future. And now that brings us very nicely into a perspective from the scientific side of the houses, and we are joined from Italy by Andrea Tamarelli, who's a senior fellow with the Institute for Environmental Protection and Research in Italy. And to ask Andrea, first, can we hear you and see you?
Yes, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. And then to ask you, from your perspective, from the scientific perspective, how you see the whole digital twin of the ocean endeavors as have been described earlier. How do you see that benefiting and assisting and strengthening your work and the work of fellow scientists?
So I start from what was already underlined as a game changer. So it's really important for science, but also for science that has to be applied to operational problems like ISPRA is leading in Italy, is the need that the data needs to be interoperable, and we have to have a facilitated way of getting the data for monitoring ocean and coastal areas. So this is one of the key issues, because there is a need to have a wider and concerted effort to take on the challenge of climate and biodiversity loss. What I mean is the fact that at European level, we have a lot of data and information. You were citing the data from DigiMare, but there are also Copernicus data. So at this point, what the digital twins can offer is taking all this data and making a game changer in building the digital twin. So making the research scientists and the research community with a benchmark against which they can start to link the scientific development to decision. What we see as a digital twin role is the fact that it's not only improving the model, but it's really giving the what-if scenario, because this is something that is still missing and there's a need. So the availability of continuous and consistent Earth observation data, that is essential. So I'm a national delegate to Copernicus, to the Copernicus Foreign Committee. It's a key part, but it's still missing a place where all this information is not only modeling, but what I was saying, it's really making a long time series. So a base for real-time analysis and forecast that is needed as a combination of all the data like optical, altimetry, radar data, and so on. So it has to be a step forward in respect on what like Copernicus is already giving. So this is something that the digital twins can really make as a change of paradigm, because this has to still be improved. And as a research scientist in ISPRA, what we are facing is also, as also Martin was already underlined, there's really a huge development of several digital twins. But we all know that ocean has no boundary. There's no difference between the boundary part of Italy from France and so on, like in the Mediterranean areas. So having several digital twins is an improvement, but has to make let's say a roadmap to put all these digital twins, all these results in a unique digital twins ocean, where scientists and especially policymakers can give and can have information in that sense. And that's why it's important to have the digital twin investment.
Thank you very much. Now, a question I'll pose to each of the panelists, and we'll go with the order in the program with Martin first, but to each of you, you've told us all your views on the digital twin and how it will support different priorities and stakeholders. In non-technical terms, we would like to hear what your expectations on the EU DTO. What are the priorities that the EU DTO should follow in the short term to the end of 24 and beyond that? Martin.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I think from the panel comments, and I'm sure from the discussions of the last 2 days, it becomes very clear what the need is, or the ask is, or what the gap is in the development of the various digital twins of the ocean. What we need is an interoperability platform, a place where observations can be easily curated and get, a place where we can exchange model components, bits and pieces, a place where experience can be shared, because the European digital twin of the ocean, let's say, platform or environment will enable individual actors, private sector, scientists, regulators, to build in a modular way their own digital twin on the issue that they want to get information on, or that decision support. So I think the enormous opportunity for the European digital twin of the ocean framework, shall we say, is to advance standards, interoperability, build out that data lake capability, and really share the nodes and models and boundary conditions to enable many, many actors to build their digital twins for their decision-making support system.
Thank you, Martin. As always, so succinct, but yet right on the nail. And that stressing that point about the standards and the data interoperability, I actually had that mentioned in my ear during the coffee break. So you're on it. Corinne.
Actions and digital twins running around Europe to connect them urgently to the future DTO and between them, and ensure the interoperability. But don't forget the land sea interface with the river basin, with all the phenomena coming from the land to the sea.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There's nothing else you wish to say there? I was just wondering that there was a connection blip. No, it's good. Excellent. Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you, Peter. I suppose I think that everything that's been mentioned is really important from the sort of technical perspective, but coming at it from the user perspective, I think there's a few priorities. Certainly into the medium term, having a portal that's accessible not just by researchers, but by the business people who are going to be developing products from this, using this platform, is going to be really important, and having that accessibility. But in the very near term, next year, I think it would be really useful to develop some strong demonstrator projects. We heard about one this morning in terms of bycatch, and that's a really good project, but it's still quite a niche project. So I would say engaging with industry to understand what their priorities are, and developing some strong demonstrators or even one strong demonstrator project that can provide a tangible benefit to industry would be really beneficial. And I'll give an example of what such a project could be. I mentioned earlier about marine protected areas. If there was to be a strong demonstrator project that could model, give a predictive capacity to potentially, for example, an ORE, an offshore renewable energy development, and it could actually model what would happen if you move the turbines this way or this way, because we know from a lot of international research how an array is placed has a huge impact in terms of its efficacy and also in terms of its environmental impact and impact on fisheries. But we know that from other jurisdictions. So to be able to model that in Irish bays or in bays off France, for example, to be able to do that in local conditions, and then to be able to layer in what would happen if we co-located this with a seaweed farm or with an oyster farm or with a mussel farm, and understanding what that impact would be. That would be of huge benefit to industry who could see the real-time benefits of what this project can do, because it is a tremendous project, but it is going to take quite some time. And I think having those proof of concepts would be really, really valuable.
Thank you, Caroline. Excellent examples. And again, the practicality, which I think is a great service to those who are doing the huge work of building the backbone of the system as we speak. And finally, Andrea?
Yes, so as I was already citing, if we improve and tailor Copernicus product, this could be, one of the priorities. So it is really important to increase the accuracy using this data for creating a robust and reliable operational system that is not yet there. So the digital twin, in this sense, could help scientists in developing what is the what-if scenario. That is a major missing gap. This is something that is really needed. And as a second point, the combination of various data into the DTO will allow, especially users that can meet their need. And as a final one, Earth observation data integrated into marine information from models will be, and will have the advantage to be available on a regular basis. And this is something that is, one of the priority. This is really a priority that it has to be taken from the DTO implementation.
Thank you very much. Excellent examples. And it springs to mind also in parallel to the examples Caroline has suggested, and Martin and others. One of the global initiatives under the UN Decade, and indeed under the mission, is the creation of 30 by 30 in terms of marine protected areas. One can see phenomenal benefits from a case study of such an MPA of scale. Our diversity of MPAs, I'm very familiar with such a diversity being developed in Portugal between coastal and island, Madeira and the Azores. They could be test cases to track how well the actual desired outcomes and benefits from MPAs actually in real time, and with climate pressures being layered on top. Again, what a contribution this tool could make. So for the panelists, first of all, I'm coming to your final wrap up to thank you for the efficiency of your timekeeping, even in the challenges of hybrid working, and to thank the team for all the hybrid support. Your chance for your last take-home message, either tell us why you believe stakeholders should be interested in engaging with the EU DTO development, what will the benefits be for them, or any other take-home message you'd like to close with. And I'll start again with Martin.
Yes, thank you, Peter. What a wonderful session. So let me just make two comments. First of all, I'm also staying here for the International Digital Twin of the Ocean program, DITO. And I think it's really exciting to see how the European effort nicely dovetails with what is happening internationally. The DITO has held the first summit last year in London, and the next summit will be this year in November in Xiamen in China. And the reason why I bring that up here, I think it's fora like this which will help us to understand where we are in the European world, where we're leading, where we're trailing, what other nations are doing. And the one thing I've been experiencing through my work in the international community in Ditto is that the private sector is extremely active, not only on the side, as we heard from the fisheries example, they want to use digital twins of the ocean, but they're actually developing them. So I think what's the exciting framework is here for the European effort is to really enable that development in the private sector and set the standards and operability so the private sector can operate not in isolation, but actually in conjunction with each other and other efforts. So I think that is the most important area of opportunity for the European Digital Twin of the Ocean to really provide that framework, to provide the innovation, but also standard setting as an enabler for private actors in that space, not only as beneficiaries from the outcome, but also as those being actively involved in running them and shaping them. And the last point I want to make, Peter, is there's enormous innovation and visualization, and we didn't talk about much here, but I think digital twins will be really much more powerful if the visualization end of that gets co-developed with the stakeholder consultation. And I think there's big companies like NVIDIA, gaming companies very interested in this space. So I think we really have a wonderful opportunity to really have that engagement of the private sector with the innovators, with the scientists in this area of digital twins, plural, of the ocean. Single ocean, plural twins.
Super, Martin, thank you. And now I turn to France and Corinne.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, okay. Many thanks for all and for this very fruitful meeting. I'm sure that stakeholders and policymakers want to change the game. It's an evidence, and the DTO is a hope for that. I think that they will find, or they want to find in the DTO all the information, the knowledge they need to change their way of work and their policies. So my last keywords will be interoperability and connect.
Very wise final words. Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you. For me, it's the opportunity that is presented by having a world-class testing environment for the new opportunities that are coming at us in the seafood sector. As Martin mentioned, connecting it to the commercial reality of the companies that are going to be developing products that they're going to be using, that are going to give us as Europeans competitive advantage in a global market, and that we can be the leaders and the game changers in the aquatech sector in particular, and also using it to really bring our fisheries management to the next level in terms of a proper full ecosystem approach to fisheries management and using those predictive capacities. But all of this needs to be done with full consultation with industry, with agencies such as ours, who can be really connecting the work that's being done with the real life examples of where it's going to be employed in the economy.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And finally, Andrea.
Yes, thanks. I have two major take-home messages. The first one is that users are absolutely ready to use the digital twins. Actually, they are really interested both in the private sector and in the institutional one. Involving them is going to lead in what I was underlying, the what-if scenario. Otherwise, there's an increasing market of what we call the downstream sector, downstream market. And without digital twins, this cannot be achieved. The second take-home message that is related to what we have discussed in this section, this very good section, is the fact that we have also at European level several initiatives about digital twin. We all know that there are destination apps, there are other issues. Making a clear interoperability of all these investment, it's a key factor for not confusing the end user. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to figure out what is really under development at European level. Of course, DTO are not under the destination, but they have to be linked. So the interoperability is another key message. Thanks.
Thank you so much, panel. And on behalf of the audience, may I thank you all for a super series of contributions, to thank you all for your brilliant timekeeping, and to hand the floor back now a little early, which is always appreciated by an audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Indeed, may I invite you to sit for another moment, but since we have a couple of minutes left in this panel, I would invite the participants in the room, if they have a question for one of our panelists, to share it now. If not, we're going to release you. Everything was super clear, and we have no questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you also for your online participation, Martin, Corinne, Andrea.
Thank you. So we're about to move to the second roundtable, which will be moderated by my dear colleague Zoe. The digital twins is, of course, a very ambitious technological endeavor, but it does raise a number of societal questions, of ethical questions, and responsibility questions. And these must be integrated in the very beginning of the development of the DTO. And so this is why we are asking today our panelists, which Zoe will introduce, to address these issues. So Zoe, the floor is back to you.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm experienced. Haven't yet connected, although I see Sheila is with us. I will present our panelists that are here in the room with us. Our panel on social aspects, ethics and responsibility is going to be led by Alice Vadrot, that is a Mission Ocean board member and an associate professor in the University of Vienna in aspects of political sciences, specifically regarding science policy interface in marine and coastal subjects. And Nicholas Pate, that is the executive director of the European Research Infrastructure of the European Marine Biological Research Center and the coordinator of the Marco Polo project that is related to the digital twin of the ocean and with marine biodiversity. And we have with us online Stephen Parkinson, Parky, as he prefers to be called, that is the Grand Innovation Coordination of Earthwatch, and Sheila Heymans, the Executive Director of the European Marine Board. We are not going to be able to have Olivia Gambelin with us, as she had an emergency, unfortunately, but I'm sure that we're going to have a very interesting discussion in between us. Alice, I'm going to start with you. And my first question is that we have seen already, and from the previous panel, the role that the European digital twin of the ocean core infrastructure and the digital twins that are going to be developed can play to support the access to marine knowledge for different uses. From a purely societal point of view, can you tell us what will be the main challenges of using the digital twin of the oceans to serve these societal needs?
Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction. It's difficult to say because the digital twin is an emerging infrastructure. However, I think there are three challenges that I would like to point out here and that some of you have also raised during the workshop yesterday. And it's the challenge of having multiple needs, interests and values, the issue of trust and the need to address inequalities. So to the first challenge. So yes, there are multiple needs, values and interests. The DTO will not operate in a vacuum. It will operate in specific institutional, legal and political settings. And assessing what the specific needs are will require us to reflect on who will be using the DTO, for what purpose, and under which institutional, legal and political conditions. So accommodating the DTO to match these different needs, interests and values is really challenging and will require identifying users and their needs first. But this brings us to the challenge, who are the users and what are their needs and interests? And some of these may compete. So in fact, we will have still to deal with the politics and the conflicts that we are facing right now when we try to make decisions in favor of a sustainable oceans. The second point I would like to make is the issue of trust. So ensuring that people, regardless of their needs, interests, and values, will trust the DTOs, so the prototype, but then all the different DTOs that will be developed by industry or by scientific actors. This will be challenging. So DTOs may create an array of legal and political uncertainties regarding data access, ownership, security, conditions to share the data, which need to be addressed to avoid mistrust in these new emerging tools. And this is closely related to issues we've seen in science advice earlier. So you need credibility, saliency, and legitimacy, and these are preconditions for any kind of uptake of scientific knowledge in policy making, but also in decision making taking part in the private sector. So DTOs have the power to change how we know and govern the ocean, but users also need to trust these new tools. And this implies to me trust in the technology itself and the different applications that may emerge at a later point, especially also the use of artificial intelligence. I think this is something that may be less feared maybe in the private sector, but maybe in the public sector, also by the broader society, but also trust in the results of a DTO and how they can be used as legitimate tools. Well, the third challenge that I mentioned earlier is the inequalities. I think this is also something that was addressed in many of the working groups yesterday. Inequalities between different actor groups regarding their capacities to actually use DTOs, to develop them, to feed their data into it, to have the data literacy needed to actually use it as a game changer in the area, but then also global inequalities between different regions, especially states of the global south, developing states that may not have the capacities to take part in this game-changing activity.
Thank you very much, Alice. You're raising many important considerations that we have to take forward, certainly. Nicholas, if I may turn to you. During the last years, the last decades, we have seen multiple efforts especially coming from science to inform society and to try to pass marine knowledge to society. And if we want to be honest, there are variant results in these efforts. What are the lessons learned that we can take from this previous experience to the use and the development of a European digital twin of the ocean and multiple other twins for use from society?
Thank you for that question. There we go. We've heard a lot so far about the main actors, I think, that most people consider, which are the scientists and the decision makers. But we also have to really remember that one of the major stakeholders in this endeavor, in looking after our planet, in well managing resources, is of course also society in general. So I think it is very important that they are not forgotten in this activity. Now, we have, with mixed results, tried over the last 10 years to do this. And I think in the past we had a tendency to talk at society. You know, we took the lectures from the university out into the public, tried to change the language a little bit, but I think it's been very difficult to engage people in a one-way conversation. And we see when we start to talk to people that they're very interested in the why. Why are we doing it? But also, in many cases, so what? Well, what does that mean for me? Why should I care? And what's really interesting is that once you start to have this conversation, you find out that people have a very different perspective on what we do with the science and why we do it. Alice actually gave me a very good experience last year where I had the chance to participate in a panel of discussing digitization of the oceans with the public. And what struck me within about 5 minutes was that the questions we were getting and the conversation we were having is not at all the conversations we have in these sort of meetings. People are concerned about what it means for their everyday lives, access to data in a time of conflict and so on. And this is important for us to bear in mind for this conversation not to pass completely next to society. Now, we have seen a tendency over the last couple of years to be much more inclusive in the way we do things. So we are much more engaging people, not in a lecture, but in a conversation. So we're having more participatory science, we have more citizen science, and the feedback from these have been very, very positive. People are engaged. Actually, we see that the data produced very often is extremely good. People are very careful, very attentive to why they're doing it. And this longer process allows them to appreciate, first of all, how we do science. And this is something that most people don't understand. So that's very useful. Second of all, it allows them to understand why we're doing it and what the impact is. So I think this is a really good improvement in the way that we communicate. And we see as well that sometimes these conversations change the questions we ask in science. They open different avenues we hadn't considered in the past. And we must resist the temptation to think that we have all the answers and we know better. We don't always. We also have our own bubbles in the way we consider things. And when we take initiatives like that are much more participatory, and an example here, a good example, I think, is things like iNaturalist, where all of a sudden you're creating a huge engaged community that continuously gather data. And it's not just a nice exercise in engaging, but it's actually generating research-grade data. And I think this is really exciting. And now, how does this then open opportunities towards digital twin? Well, I think it gives, first of all, the opportunity to, of course, visualize everything. And I was very happy to hear in the previous panel that one of the takeaway messages was we must not forget the interactive layer, the visualization, and that this has to be intuitive. Because we now have the ability to then let people not only participate in the science and be data collectors, we can involve them also in the exploration of the data and the thinking about how we do it. And then they move from just being data producers to also being interactors with the data and much more invested. And ultimately in that process, what we see is that we actually manage to change people's behavior and perspective of the sea much better than when we're just talking at them.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. These considerations were really to the point for science, and I hope that we will be able to take them forward. Now, may I turn to Parky online? Parky, your line of work is exactly to engage society, both in order to transfer environmental knowledge, but also to take societal considerations back to policy and to science. From your line of work and from your experience, can you give us your view in the impact that the use of the digital twin of the ocean can have in addressing important societal considerations impactfully?
Yeah, thank you. I think my answer really continues very nicely from what has already been said by the other panelists. I think the best way for us to ensure that we're addressing societal considerations is to give society a clear role in the EU digital twin of the ocean, which will help to ensure that the DTO then meets their needs, giving them a role also maybe then increases their trust in the DTO, and empowers them as active users of it as well. And this could be in the co-definition of the issues for the DTO to focus on, or the co-design of the DTO itself, contributions via citizen science, or the use of the digital twin of the ocean for education and outreach. And in the ILIAD project where I work, we have a work package dedicated to citizen science and engagement in the development of our ILIAD digital twins of the ocean. And my work at Earthwatch is also very much based around citizen science, and that's the kind of perspective that I bring to the EU digital twin of the ocean. And even in just considering citizen science as one aspect of societal involvement, we can already consider how it might increase the impact of a digital twin of the ocean in terms of increased public engagement and involvement in the twin itself, but also in the environmental topics which the twin covers. Increased public awareness and education through the interactive layer of the digital twin of the ocean, using the digital twin to empower communities to learn more about their environment. The increased public participation in decision making through their increased knowledge of the environment, helping to kind of foster agency, help communities take a more active role in environmental management. And I think through all these impacts, or through public involvement in the design of the digital twin of the ocean itself, an increased societal relevance of digital twins. There are of course also challenges from my perspective. and again, particularly focusing on citizen science. I think because of the technical and sometimes even industrial nature of certain digital twins of the ocean, the case for citizen science, for example, is not always clear. I think we could consider an example where it might not make sense to try and engage citizen scientists in areas or to cover parameters where we already have plenty of high quality data for the EU digital twin of the ocean. I think there's a question of whether that would be meaningful engagement if their contribution to the digital twin isn't really needed, if it doesn't change the digital twin. I think that the societal involvement in the EU digital twin of the ocean should be transformative, both for the research being taken place and for society, and not just kind of like a box ticking exercise. And yeah, I don't think it's a surprise that citizen science doesn't make sense in every case. I don't think that any of the approaches that we've discussed to societal involvement will be appropriate in every case. But I think when we consider the full spectrum of public engagement approaches, I think there can and there should always be a role for society in the EU digital twin of the ocean. And by incorporating public engagement or citizen science or any other way to give society a role in the development and the deployment of the EU digital twin of the ocean, we can support a more inclusive and democratic environmental decision-making process where we really empower citizens to play an active role in shaping the future of the oceans.
Thank you very much, Parky. Indeed, if it's something that it's clear in this process is that we have to move all together hand by hand and put a lot of effort in inclusive approaches that will take society in this. With this, I would like to turn to Sheila. Sheila, your expertise lies in the development of numerical models and tools for management of marine resources. How can we, through your experience, how can we convince society and the marine stakeholders specifically to trust in the European digital twin of the ocean and the tools that it's going to include? And how can we communicate better both the opportunities that these tools may provide, but also the limitations that they have?
Hi, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me, and really sorry I can't be there with you guys today. I think my intervention will follow on really well from both Nicola and Parky's intervention, and actually what Alice has said. First of all, I think trust is very important, and we have to be aware that citizens already are engaged. They already care about the ocean. They're already, I think they're ready to help us with managing our resources sustainably. But we have to engage them in a trusted way. So I think one of the most important things that we need to do is to co-design this tool with citizens or with stakeholders. I know both Nicola and Parky mentioned citizen science a lot, but it doesn't always just have to be citizen science. You know, in some of the projects that we've worked on, we've actually engaged with fishermen to help us parameterize our models better and to actually help us get better analyses of the data, understanding how the ecosystems looked further back when we didn't have data. So we have to be able to engage with them from the beginning, but also one of the other very important things that you have to do when you're engaging with stakeholders and engaging with the public at large is that if you are going to engage with them to help you, understand what's going on in the world, you have to go back and give them feedback of what the data and the information that they've given you, how that's improved your results. And if you don't basically give feedback to them of how what they've done has actually improved what you're doing, then they're going to stop engaging. So I think it's quite important that we understand that this is not just a one-off thing, but you have to really engage along the chain of the project. Then the other thing that is important is that Of course, you don't want to go and give them the source code because they don't really care. You want to make sure that you actually communicate the what the digital twin is about, or what it specifically wants to do, in a way that's understandable. And for that, you really need good interfaces, good visuals, and you really need to think about what is important to the specific stakeholders that you're actually talking to. And for instance, in some of the work that we've done at the Marine Board on big data, one of the highlights that came out of that is that you can really use these types of tools, AI and that kind of thing, to help with storytelling if you do it well. So there's ways and means of doing this, but you have to really just engage in a thoughtful way. And then I think you also asked about uncertainties and how do we explain the uncertainties in these tools. I think there's quite a lot of good work that's been done by the IPCC in explaining uncertainties, and I'm sure it's probably not try to reinvent the wheel, but use the methods that others are using already to do that. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Exactly to the point as always. We touched already, Alice, I'm going back to you. We touched already on discussions of the ethical dimension of artificial intelligence, and we hear nowadays every day something in the news about the ethics of artificial intelligence, especially regarding the use of personal data. We also heard you before touching on issues of the use of this kind of tools in a manner that is going to be socially equitable, if I'm saying it correctly, and in a manner that will allow all voices to be heard, especially in issues that are related to marine and coastal management. Can you set the scene a little bit on which are the main challenges? You have already said some things, but a little bit deeper, it would be very nice. How can we address these challenges in your view?
The problem I, as a social scientist, have encountered when I was thinking about this is to ask, what is the digital twin? And if you look, there are interesting philosophers that reflected on this, and they say it's composed of 3 pillars. It's the technical artifact, so that would be the data lake we are talking about. It's the ocean as a physical entity, and then it's all the data relations within that. Yeah. So I think any solution must also look at these 3 pillars. So not just the technical artifact and trying to get people, scientists, private sector scientists engaged to reflect on, how can we take part in this endeavor? How can we feed in our data, etc.? How can we use it? But the other part is to look at all data-related practices that take part. And here I think the UN Decade of Ocean Science has made a step forward, recognizing the colonial heritage of ocean science, recognizing the need to change oceanography or to make oceanography fit for purpose. I think that's what one scientist said. And so I think any solution must address these different levels and to go beyond the actual technical artifact, but also look at how do we know the ocean? What is relevant ocean science? What's relevant ocean data? How do we feed it in? This is one important dimension. And the other dimension, I think this is what I also said, is thinking about how digital ocean twins can actually be included and integrated into decision-making as democratic and legitimate tools. But I think this will really require local, regional and national dialogues about these tools, how they relate to existing information, science advice, data-driven policymaking, and to allow a democratic dialogue, also including, for instance, an actor we have not mentioned here, political parties as well, those that are in power or, those that represent the interests of citizens. I think they are also very important actors to reflect on the value of evidence-based decision-making. And I consider DTOs to be part of this process to make decision-making more evidence-based.
Of course, and we have to consider the whole mosaic of stakeholders indeed. And to turn the discussion to the rest of our panel, starting with you, Nicholas. What, in your view, are the main ethical considerations in the development and the use of the EU digital twin of the ocean? And then what can we do to ensure ethical and transparent use?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would say I think it's a really good step is the fact that we're actually having this panel in the first place. Too often we get carried away by new technology and the potential and what we can do with it. And I think in science, we often have a tendency to be very idealistic. And we think, yes, we can really change things and make progress. But the reality is that not everybody has that mindset and there's a real world behind it. First of all, I'd like to say I really liked Sheila's point about the inclusion of not just the citizens, but all of the stakeholders. And this is a really important example of the people who depend on the sea being involved in the conversation. And we must always remember to bring those in terms of determining the questions and how we do things. But some of the big risks, I think, first of all, is Alice has touched on it, but I think it's worth raising again, because for me, it's also one of the major ones. And that's the question of access. We've heard about the huge potential, and I think we can all see what we could do with this thing. But who can access it? There's a huge technological barrier about being able to use this in Europe even. It's not every European country that has all of the same capabilities as everyone else. So how do we make sure that we're bringing everybody along and we're getting everybody to benefit from it? But even beyond Europe, this is creating another step up for other countries to be involved and to participate. And how do we make sure that is inclusive? And particularly today, we are in a world where we're back to having a lot of conflicts. We're seeing conflicts all over the world. Who controls the access to the digital twin? Who turns off the access if there's a conflict or you disagree with somebody? You're all of a sudden in control of a decision-making tool that impacts economy, decision-making, and citizens. So I think these are important questions that we have to bear in mind. Outside of the human sphere, I think somebody raised a question in the earlier panel as well, which on the ethics of, well, what about giving access and showing everybody where all the endangered species are and where we just reintroduced something? That is a question to think about as well. It opens up potential for fishing something that we don't have. There's many historical examples of species, the last existing individuals being removed by collectors. And so these are things we have to consider as well. How do we balance decision-making and need and protection without them being in conflict with one another? And the final one is the question of trust. We saw in COVID the problems of trust and how much misinformation goes about. So transparency is hugely important in this and taking time to explain. And as soon as we're going to introduce things like artificial intelligence and what people will be perceiving as decision-making, not made by humans, but by machines, this is going to raise enormous questions, debate, and ultimately disengagement from some people saying, well, we will not be able to trust this and we will not be able to engage with it. So I think these are, for me, the top priorities to bear in mind. How exactly we're going to integrate that, I think, is a lot through inclusion, involvement, and showing that in a transparent way how we're using it and how we're generating the information and the data, and that it's also being used not just in an economic sense, but also in generally to improve people's lives.
Thank you very much indeed. Parky, can I turn the same question to you now?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting challenge of us making promises of the societal potential of the digital twin of the ocean. We've set ourselves now a big challenge which we have to live up to. And we've spoken about the digital twin of the ocean as potentially like empowering or transformative, but this doesn't happen automatically. Just because the digital twin of the ocean as a tool exists doesn't mean that people will use it or want to use it or know how to use it. And I think the work doesn't stop with the creation of the digital twin, but we need to think about how we build programs of societal engagement with the digital twin of the ocean. As Alice was talking about the kind of democratic dialogue around the DTOs, or Nicholas mentioned, how do we ensure access? Like, these things are not things that happen automatically just from once the technical development of the digital twin has taken place. This takes just as much work, if not more, to put into the societal development of the digital twin of the ocean, as well as the technical development. Otherwise, I think all of these ethical considerations that we've mentioned will kind of drown the digital twin of the ocean that's created.
Thank you. I actually agree very much with what you said, because I personally see the developments around the European digital twin of the ocean and all the twins that it's going to include as a vehicle. And then we have to build the processes around the vehicle, the science policy interface processes that are going to make this use actually impactful. Sheila, can I turn the question to you as well?
Can you repeat? Is it about the ethics of the
Yes, the ethical considerations in the development and use of the digital twin ocean, the main aspects for you, and how can we ensure ethical and transparent use?
I think Nicola made a very good point as well about the importance of making sure that the digital twin is available to everybody. So I think indeed, ethically, we have to be very clear that this should be open and to everybody to use. But I think we have to also be a little bit careful that we don't get hung up on the framework or the machine that runs the model. You know, a digital twin can be many different things, and it doesn't have to be a high-powered computer sitting in Brussels running a model. It could really be something much simpler, and it could use sort of pre-run solutions that you could use to help explain things and help to create stories. So I think, I mean, how do we make sure that the big machine running the model doesn't get taken over by some rogue nation, essentially? That's a different question. But I think we can do a lot, and we shouldn't get hung up with the digital twin being something that's more fancy than it needs to be. In that sense, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we have to be careful that we don't make it out to be something bigger than it needs to be.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And may I ask every one of you, starting with Alice, for a final statement on this issue, on this discussion on social issues and ethical considerations?
Well, that's very difficult, and I will use the speaking time to point to an issue I forgot, if I may. I think we've all discussed the need to include socio-ecological and socio-economic data, and this is a whole ethical issue in itself. How do we make sure we not only include like physical, chemical, geological, biological data, but when we touch on the socioeconomic data that may include sensitive data, this will be another issue. And here I think we will need really like ethical specialists to discuss this, not just technicians.
I totally agree with you, and you know that we have the Mission Ocean call on socio-ecological data, so this is a consideration for the people that are applying. Nicolas, your final statement.
So my final statement would be that I believe that we need to make sure we always keep the ethical questions in mind, that we make sure we put the proper checks and balances in place, that we don't get carried away with the way that we view technology and our enthusiasm of it. But I will also take the opportunity to say that there's still a long way to go, particularly around biology and ecosystems, before we're anywhere close to making big predictions, simulations, and so on. We have to remember there's a whole knowledge base and a lot of understanding that still needs to be generated before this can work for many aspects of the ecosystem and biology. And we need to close those knowledge gaps to get the most out of the digital twin, because the oceans is more than water and currents. It's everything that lives in there. That's where the action is, and that is what still needs a lot of clarification.
Thank you, and this is indeed very important if we want to be certain, more certain than we currently are, and our marine knowledge. Parky?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that we have these discussions, especially during the development of the digital twin, that we have this at the start of this journey, that we kind of try and raise all these issues before they kind of come up as surprises. I think within that, there's also a risk that we don't want to get complacent just because we've had this discussion, because we've had this panel and kind of thought about these things, that we think it will kind of now everything's fixed and it will happen automatically. I think it's good that we continue to challenge ourselves to hold each other to account on the sort of things that we've said here, because yeah, they're all very difficult. So I look forward to the challenge as we move forward in the development.
Thank you for this, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that this is just the discussion, the start of the discussion. We hope that we're going to have more elaborate opportunities to go deeper into these issues. And finally, Sheila.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have, if I make 2 points. First of all, starting with the point that Nicola made about there's quite a lot of information and quite a lot of things we don't know yet about biology. I agree, but I don't think that means we shouldn't at least try. So I think if we're going to use this digital twin tool as something to manage, then we have to be sure that we make it clear where we have knowledge and where we don't, and where the uncertainties are. We have to be very clear about that. And indeed, socioeconomic data is very important, because you can't use this tool in a way to manage if you don't understand the impact it will have on people. So it's really important that we don't just look at the biology or just the physics or biochemistry, but also incorporate the socioeconomic. But then my very final statement is that I always say that without observations, models are just computer games. So if we don't have the observations to actually parameterize the digital twin, it'll forever just be, another computer game. And I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Sheila. It's good to put all the considerations, to connect all the considerations together. And with this, I would like to thank the panelists that are here with me in the room. Alice, Nicholas, thank you very much. Sheila, Parky, thank you for connecting. Let's give them.
Thank you, Zoe. So we're reaching the end of these 2 very intense days, and it is my great pleasure to welcome my director, John Bell, who's director in DG Research and Innovation of the Healthy Planet Directorate, and he's also the deputy mission manager of Restore Our Ocean and Water. So John, the floor is yours.
And we can have all kinds of industrial spin-offs. But in the end, the argument is about purpose. What is the public purpose of what we're doing here today? And what I'm hearing and listening this morning and listening to all of your interventions is I think this is at a very advanced stage of internalizing why we should be doing this and what is needed for its success. So we all know here, I mean, this is a very, very distinguished group of people online and in here. We know that our oceans determine our futures. They determine our present. Most people don't know that. Most people think the oceans are about fish and chips and, going to the beach and occasionally feeling romantic or terrified about them. Everything about our transition will be determined in the ocean. We're a very unusual generation of people. We're the first civilization that understands our dilemma because of science and knowledge and collaboration and working together. And we understand some of the parameters about what is happening to us and how we are going to address them. And many of the most vulnerable people in every sense, not just in Europe, and Martin was right to remind us our obligations to connect, are living in areas where we are going to need a lot more knowledge about what is happening and what we do about it, not simply in terms of the weather and the dynamics of the ocean and all of the different streams we need to integrate, chemical, biological, physical, and so forth, or about the brilliance of what could or should happen in terms of modeling, but a lot of the things we're going to do to make this transition happen. How are we, as Caroline mentioned earlier on, going to have this huge scaling up of renewable energy if we don't know what it means for the people living there, the ecology living there, the effects it will have? And what are we going to do as the fish stocks move and as the opportunities of aquaculture or the harvesting of the microbiome or whatever it is that food from the sea means will need to be addressed in a different way? The obligation to conservation. We've lots and lots of great targets and legislation and policies. Kestutis set them out earlier on. Our task in the European Union in the next generation is to make peace with nature. We know more or less what we want to do. How are we going to do that if we do not understand fundamentally both our connection to what is there? So the ocean, I think, Stephen, you said it very well. We are part of this. It's not just about data and ecology and systems and models, and it's actually understanding that we are part of this planetary consciousness. We need to have knowledge, and we need to have knowledge organized and validated and trusted and harnessed and applied and tested and piloted in ways that suddenly people understand the connection. They understand why we need to understand more about the ocean and how that knowledge can help us both to deal with what we're learning about the ocean and actually to make a better future. Science must give hope to people, it must give confidence to policymakers, it must give space to innovation, and it must give respite to nature. So a lot of what we're talking about here, I mean, it's impossible to summarize all of the inputs that are here. It's about how we frame this issue. So today has been very interesting, and yesterday has been very interesting in listening to this. I think Pascal, said it very well at the beginning. This is the only way to provide the knowledge to address, he calls it the hydrosphere, which is a new kind of understanding, the science gaps that we need to get quickly to the space in which we can make decisions about our futures. And he also said we can do it. So let's do it. Now, it's a bit more complicated than that, of course. But knowing where you're going to get to is very important. And if I can make a couple of observations, I was very struck by the conversations around, we say all the right things because actually the scientific and research communities are very conscientious about engaging with citizens and so forth. But actually we need to step up. We need language around this that people can understand. We need to understand, what are we talking about? A digital twin of the ocean, And, by the third line, I saw there's a great visual display outside. We need to find a way of showing what this is and what it will look like and why it will matter if you're a fisheries community person or you're an industry is thinking of investing or you're a bank that's, doesn't really want to take risks or you're people whose whole livelihoods and societies and cultures are on the line from these people far away in Brussels making decisions. So you need to find a vernacular language. Part of the project has to be the creative, the humanities, the people who can actually narrate what this is, find a vernacular to talk about this. This is why we got to the moon and back, is because people were inspired and people felt part of it. If people think this is a technological project with lots of AI and machines in the ocean and all kinds of people surveying us and satellites and, underwater, we all know how that's going to end up. Now, this is the other thing. This is the other enormous contribution you can make to, let's call it the democratic underpinnings of our society, our civilization that is based on making the unpredictable predictable. This is playing a very important role, and it's going to be a lot more urgent and a lot more scary and a lot more big scale about a lot of the things that people don't think about: where we live, how we eat, what do we do when it's too hot and too cold in our cities, and the weather, and all of these things that are going to be ahead for us, and decisions that are going to have to be made. They need to be able to make the unpredictable predictable. So the test cases that we make should not only be driven by what we can do or how good we are at the technology or the science, but what are the pilot and test cases we can do in places that will build confidence that this is obviously something that needs to be done invested in and turned from a scientific infrastructure into a public infrastructure as central to our world in the next few years as street lighting was to the Industrial Revolution. That is basically our task here. Now, you'll do all the really hard stuff really well. This needs to be addressed early so that we don't scare people off in terms of, what are all these people doing? And I'm sure that you will. A lot of what has been covered here shows there's just an extraordinary amount of cooperation and connection. One of the great things about scientific and research communication, people are inherently open and connected. Access is another word that Stephen made. We need to make sure there's access and involvement of different kinds of people who will be affected by this, who will need to use this, who will need to live with this and apply this from the beginning to the end. Not, here's a bunch of technology that we've actually cooked up. Let's try and apply this through some program over here. Would you like some of this? And maybe some, money falling out of the sky to make it happen. Now, you know what you need to do about this. We need to move it forward. We've heard from yesterday's workshop, these extraordinary array of people and projects and programs. I mean, the scale of what has already been put in place is really impressive. This will be a game changer, whether we're talking about local authorities or science or public authorities, businesses, citizens, and so forth. If we put the needs, we keep the users all the time in the framing of what and why we're doing things. And we have really very difficult short-term challenges to our transition ahead. Because students mentioned, and Evie, you mentioned marine spatial planning. This is, in Brussels, this is a really big policy concept. This is a very difficult problem for real people who do not have resources and don't have choices and whose entire cultures and civilizations are being called into question as they see it from. So we need to be able to find ways to deal with this and biodiversity loss and how we find ways to turn the challenge of conservation into the opportunities for communities to renew and regenerate in a fair and just way. So there's a lot at stake. It's not just about having great kit, having the equivalent of good shiny satellites up there. We need all of that, of course. But if you want to get it to move up quickly to where it needs to be, and this is basically, the ocean is inner space. This is an inner space program that we're actually launching ourselves on. In a generation's time, they will look back and they'll see this is what the scientists actually meant and what was possible. So let's build the trust as we move it forward. There's many aspects that have been signaled here by many of you, but I mean, I think these issues on responsibilities, data ownership, flexibility, uncertainties, equality, capacity development, the opportunities and challenges of artificial intelligence. I would actually settle for intelligence half the time in the decision-making process, but the artificial intelligence challenge in itself, people are terrified in a way, and the popular space is being occupied by people who like to make the predictable unpredictable. So that's our job, is to create a more predictable space by showing examples like this and by building test and other cases that will take it forward. I mean, this is all obvious to you, but, the importance of interdisciplinarity and cooperation, and, it's the same in policies, where we have to learn new ways of working to try and put these systemic game changers in place and to build the confidence that people who will fund this, and the funding landscape, as you know, is very complicated, that everybody is pointing in the same direction and working in the same way to take it forward. So on behalf of the Commission, my colleagues, you've done a terrific job, of course, as always, Nicola and Ava and Elizabeth and Sylvie and all of my colleagues. Thank you for what is already a very reassuring and very impressive and very early outtake. Those of us who's been working on the mission, let's call it the Starfish mission, to keep Pascal happy today. Peter and those of us who've been in it at the beginning, we see this as a real opportunity that if this can move forward in the right way, that people will start to understand what it's all about, what it is that needs to happen to transform, regenerate our ocean and water systems, and why that connection has to be something that's a part of our normal kind of thinking and consciousness and behavior and decision making. So particularly I'd like to thank all of you for your passion, which you've kept until right now, your dedication to making this digital ocean forum a success. I know there'll be more of this, I'm sure, next year as well, when there'll probably be lots more to report. Als ik ook mijn Nederlands kan gebruiken, dus een hartelijk bedankt voor de Vlaams Marine Instituut, wij als de VLIS, I'm allowed to try the national language once or twice. Sorry for the abomination if it's upset you. And our colleagues in Mercator Ocean, who of course have done an extraordinary job in working on the core infrastructure of the EU DTO and provided extraordinary support for the organisation of this event. So next year is a big year. It's not often the President of the European Union stands up in a geopolitical space and says the priority is to get moving on this digital twin of the ocean, whatever that is. But let's by next year have it that people understand at least where we're starting, what the purpose is, why it's critical to people, to progress, to our economy, to the places where people live and hope, and that we can actually do something in test cases that will reassure people that in fact there is a better place ahead, and that we are part of that as the people who believe in knowledge and science and making the unpredictable predictable. The DTO will be one of the first movers in doing that. And the next generation of people will be standing in a place like this in 25 years' time saying, it was obvious at the time, but people didn't realize it. Thank you so much, and let's make this happen.
Thank you, John, for your inspiring closing remarks. There's no pressure on all of us, absolutely none. But we discussed that yesterday. The success of this endeavor relies on all of us. So we'll all look forward to a fruitful cooperation in the next years. Thank you very much and have a safe journey back home.